Good morning. I'm New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. For 2 decades, I was a New York City public school parent, and I often walked my own kids, Marek and Rosa, up the hill to PS 107 to take them to school in the morning. And every day, I put my trust in the city that I was walking them into a safe school, not one that was full of asbestos that could put their health at risk. But my office just completed an audit, which unfortunately shows quite the opposite, that the New York City Department of Education is out of compliance, badly out of compliance, with the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, or AHERA, a federal law that requires triennial licensed asbestos inspections of all schools containing asbestos-containing materials, and periodic inspections by New York City trained school staff in all of our schools. Now, I want to start by saying that those asbestos-containing materials, or ACMs, are any material or product that contains more than 1% of asbestos, and these materials are ubiquitous in most buildings. They include flooring, roofing, gaskets and heating, air conditioning equipment, ceiling panels and tiles, plaster, duct tape insulation, duct joint tape, and fireproofing equipment, including fire doors. And it's important to know that the presence of asbestos-containing materials alone does not automatically pose a public safety or health risk. However, if they're not inspected and properly maintained, then friable ACMs can easily release fibers into the air, and non-friable ACMs that have become damaged from weather, from maintenance, from deterioration, from puncture, or intense heat can pose hazards to our kids, and no level of exposure is safe. And prolonged exposure to asbestos during childhood can cause lung disease and can cause cancer. That's why in 1986, the federal government passed AHERA, the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, to protect our students, to protect our teachers, to protect our school staff all across the country from uninspected asbestos exposure. And over 3 decades ago, Mayor David Dinkins took this so seriously that in 1993, when the city was failing to inspect schools and to be in compliance with AHERA, Mayor Dinkins actually delayed the start of school a week and closed New York City's school buildings while the city worked to address the issue and make sure that schools were being inspected in compliance with federal law. So as part of that law, the law distinguishes between those schools which have asbestos-containing materials and those that don't. As part of that law, the 1,400 schools in the New York City system, about half of our schools that have ACMs, must have triennial inspections at least once every 3 years by a licensed asbestos inspector. And all of our schools must have a regular every 6-month periodic inspection by a custodian or other staff of DOE who are trained to conduct the periodic inspections. Unfortunately, our audit found that the city is wildly out of compliance. Between March 2021 and March 2024, the audit found that 1,174 out of the 1,431 schools that have asbestos-containing material, in other words, 82% of the schools with asbestos-containing materials did not get their licensed triennial inspection. And that includes PS 107 in Brooklyn, where Marek and Rosa went to school every day from pre-K to 5th grade, my 2 kids, which has not had an inspection by a licensed asbestos inspector since 2008, 15 years ago, when it's supposed to be conducted once every 3 years. And not for nothing, but it also includes PS 88 in Queens, where the mayor is going to be at noon today, which hasn't had an inspection by a licensed asbestos inspector since 2011, 14 years ago. Again, you're supposed to have this inspection by federal law once every 3 years. DOE typically conducts 200 to 250 inspections every 3 years, but it would need to conduct approximately 480 inspections every year, so essentially 6 times as many as they are doing, in order to be in compliance with that Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, in compliance with federal law. Now, the DOE cited insufficient consultant contracts as the reason for its failure to conduct timely triennial inspections. But let's remember, this audit shows we have been failing to conduct these inspections appropriately for decades. So this is a systemic failure and poor planning on the Department of Education. And as I said, separate from the triennial inspections by a licensed asbestos inspector, which just covers those schools with ACMs, all schools are supposed to get a periodic inspection every 6 months by a custodian or DOE staffer who has been properly trained. So that doesn't require any outside contract. That just requires training the custodial and school staff we have. Unfortunately, the city has fallen far short here as well. So 2,242 of all 2,862 schools did not receive a periodic inspection between May 1, 2023 and April 30th, 2024. That's 78% of all our schools that were out of compliance in getting their periodic asbestos inspection. Other systemic failures in the city's compliance with that federal law regarding asbestos involve failures to notify parents, teachers, and staff of the inspections that have been conducted, which is essential for transparency and safety. There has not been good distinguishing between those schools that have ACMs and those that don't, where the inspections need to take place, and what information is getting and unfortunately not getting to parents, to teachers, to educators, to school staff, and again, as required by federal law. So this is something that parents, of course, are desperate to know. You just want to know that your babies are safe in those school buildings. And you've got a right to know, am I in a building with asbestos-containing materials or not? Were the triennial inspections, are they required? If they are, if you're in your kids are in a building with ACMs, were they done? Regardless, were the periodic inspections done? And DOE is failing to conduct the triennial license inspections, failing nearly 80% of the time to conduct the periodic inspections, and failing to provide teachers and parents and school staff with the information about those inspections as required by federal law. Look, our most important job in government is to keep New Yorkers safe, and our biggest concern in our schools is, are our kids safe? Of course, we want them learning and thriving and growing, and first we want to know they're safe in their school buildings. We need these inspections done, and we need the information provided to us on a timely basis. That's why today I'm urging the Adams administration to take swift action to come into compliance with the federal Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act. And our office made 9 recommendations that I'm happy to say DOE has agreed to, but now they have to implement them. And I won't go through all 9, but that involves improving awareness and understanding of AHERA compliance. It involves getting a plan in place to have adequate licensed asbestos inspectors conducting the triennial inspections. It involves providing more training so that custodial and DOE staff are trained to conduct those periodic inspections. It involves improving the record-keeping system so that everyone can see what this is, and you don't have to rely on an audit from our good audit team, as good as they are. This ought to be information that is just available to the public on a regular basis, so everyone can see it, from the chancellor on down in the school system, and all parents and school staff can see it as well. We can live in a city where asbestos inspections are conducted as required by law, where that information is provided to parents and teachers and staff and the public, and where we do our job to keep all our students safe. I am going to turn it over now to Maura Hayes-Chafe, the Deputy Controller for Audit, whose team conducted this audit, to go over the findings and recommendations in greater detail. We've got a couple of advocates from Align and from Triage here, and they'll come up as well. And Maura, thank you very much to you and your team for conducting this important audit.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. In the audit released today, our office finds that the New York City Department of Education failed to inspect approximately 80% of school buildings containing ACM for hazards, leaving thousands of students and staff at risk. Historically, over 9 inspection cycles going back to 1997, the DOE achieved only 11% compliance with the triennial inspection requirements. Between March 2021 and March 2024, triennial asbestos inspections were completed in just 18% of New York City schools. As of 2024, 1,175 schools, or as the Comptroller has said, 82% citywide, with confirmed ACM, remain uninspected. Brooklyn faces the most severe gaps in oversight. 402 out of 464 schools with ACM, that's 87%, were not inspected in the last 3 years, resulting in a mere 13% compliance rate, the lowest in the city. Compliance rates across the boroughs remain critically low. Queens was at 16%, Staten Island 21%, Manhattan 20%, and the Bronx 25%. While the DOE increased triennial inspections to 14 per month between March 24 and September 2024, this pace remains insufficient to address the backlog of 1,175 uninspected schools. Since 1997, the DOE has conducted an average of only 11% of required triennial inspections. Between 2000 and 2003, DOE completed 0 inspections, demonstrating a prolonged disregard for safety. Systematic noncompliance with federal asbestos regulations jeopardizes the integrity of safety efforts and exposes school communities to preventable health risks. The audit revealed incomplete periodic inspections. Only 17% of 1,413 required inspections were conducted between May of 2023 and October of 2023. This figure raised to 26% from November 23 to April 24. During the one-year period from May 1, 2023 to April 30 of 2024, only 22% of schools with ACM and asbestos management plans completed the legally required 6-month surveillance inspections. DOE lacks documentation of periodic inspections prior to March of 2023. They have no documentation to show that any periodic inspections occurred during that period. They also lack documentation to confirm mandatory asbestos training for staff who are responsible for conducting periodic inspections, and DOE also lacks documentation to show that the AHERA required notifications to parents, teachers, and employee organizations was provided. These violate transparency and safety standards. Delays in issuing non-ACM determination letters have also created unnecessary inspections and compliance complications and diverted resources from critical priorities. The DOE's persistent failure to meet federal asbestos safety requirements reflects systemic mismanagement, endangering school communities and eroding public trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maura. Thanks very much, Maura, and I want to thank the audit team that worked hard on this report for these important findings. We're joined today by 2 environmental health and environmental justice advocates. We have Faiza Azam from Align, a labor community coalition that works on a range of environmental justice, health, and workers' rights and safety issues. And we're also now going to hear from Shiv Soin from Triage, a youth and student environmental justice organization. Shiv.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. My name is Shiv Soin. I serve as the co-executive director of Triage. We have over 1,000 high school and college students across all 5 boroughs of New York City in our membership, focused on hyperlocal New York City and state climate action and change. And I want to thank Comptroller Brad Lander, Louise Young, the Chief Climate Officer, the audit team, as well as the policy team at the Comptroller's office. And I wish I could say this information today is surprising, but I mean, we work with over 1,000 students in our membership who for years have flagged significant problems in New York City buildings, ranging from persistent gas leaks, lead still in the pipes and serving in water, and now as we're seeing a complete lack of control and managing the asbestos problems that we're seeing in New York City. New York City schools are incredibly old, with some buildings over 100 years old, and we're seeing asbestos in particular as incredibly damaging to the health of anybody who is actually inhaling the toxins in the air. And this is not just a student issue. Students have flagged this time and time again, and they have been persistently ignored. But this is not just a student issue. This is a workplace issue. There are thousands of teachers, school administrators who are being exposed to unhealthy conditions. And I also wish that this was not that this was limited to just asbestos. But the reality of what we're seeing with the Department of Education and the state of our New York City school buildings is a complete disinvestment and also simultaneously an inability to execute on projects. We're seeing construction projects delayed time and time again. I have spoken with several council members who have invested their own discretionary funding in improving school buildings, only to then find out that the buildings and the projects have been underfunded, they've been given inaccurate assessments, and that leads to delays and cancellations. This is completely unacceptable from the Department of Education, which manages 1.1 million students, thousands of teachers and administrators in New York City. This is a student issue, this is a health issue, this is a workplace issue, and this is also a climate issue because New York City needs to comply with Local Law 99, which is meant to install 150 megawatts of solar panels on New York City public buildings. And a good proportion of New York City's building stock is school buildings. You can't install solar panels with asbestos in schools. So we are not only are we jeopardizing students' health, workers' health, we are also jeopardizing our city's climate goals. We cannot meet a mandated law by 2035 without taking action on this now. And I really hope that now, I'm heartened to hear Comptroller Lander say that based on the recommendations that they've outlined in the report, the Department of Education has agreed, but agreement truthfully is not much until action is taken. And this is not an issue that we can continue keeping on ignoring because there are real life consequences to this. I represent students who have told us time and time again, serious issues, not just asbestos, but across the board. And it's really, really disheartening to work with students who would then have to go into school 5 days a week to then inhale and continue participating in these unhealthy conditions. So my call to action for the Department of Education, for the School Construction Authority, is truthfully, how much longer are we going to allow this to persist? How much longer are we going to allow these unhealthy conditions to last? What is going to be this breaking point? And I hope that this analysis that the Comptroller's Office has released is going to be this inflection point for the Department of Education to seriously get their act together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shiv, for the organizing at Triage, for bringing the voice of students into this critical issue and speaking so passionately about it. And I also want to say thank you to Shiv for connecting the dots between two things which I think sometimes get disconnected, the day-to-day health and safety issues in our schools and the broader issue of transforming them for the climate crisis. As Shiv made very clear, those things really go together. Of course, we need to be conducting the inspections and making sure that any asbestos-containing material is managed safely so that it's not going to pose a risk to anyone in those schools. And at the same time, we need to be acting to modernize and green our schools so they are green and healthy for our students. So we have solar panels on the roofs of our buildings so the buildings are renovated where they're more than 100 years old to provide healthy, safe, and inspiring conditions for all our kids. So thank you very much for being here today. And we will be glad to take your questions on topic first, and Chloe will manage. Yeah, not until it's your school that has leaking asbestos. And thankfully, that is not the case in the vast majority of places where there are ACMs. As I said at the beginning, in general, ACMs do not present a health or safety risk where they're properly contained, and that's most of the time. But, you know, it only takes one place where they have been leaking out to do harm to hundreds or thousands of kids and teachers and parents, and we need to have that be zero. Like, that's why this law was adopted, was to say, okay, there's a lot of asbestos out there in the world, unfortunately. We're not going to be able to get rid of every bit of it, but we've got to put our eyes on it and make sure it is well contained and safe and protected. And that's why they did this like double layer. So you're supposed to have both once every 3 years the license inspector, and then every 6 months you train your custodial staff to just look and make sure that everything is copacetic. And again, thankfully, the vast majority of the time that's the case. But if you let a school like the one where Marek and Rosa went go 15 years without an inspection, and then you've got schools that both aren't getting their triennial and aren't getting their, you know, I think if we had found that the schools weren't getting the triennial inspections, but at least the periodic inspections are taking place, and we're making sure school staff is trained and they have their eyes on this, I would feel differently. But we have no idea. We're not doing the triennial license inspections. We're not regularly doing the periodic school staff inspections. And could one building have a problem here that spills out and causes trouble? I mean, look what happened with the concern about lead in the water at Reese houses 2 years ago. You know, the purpose of a health and safety regime is to give people confidence you're not going to have problems, and today we don't have that confidence.
They've picked up the pace from March 2023. Essentially, they hired a new person who's more on the ball than previously. We have no idea.
Well, the answer is we don't know. I mean, there's 1,431 schools that are on the list as having asbestos-containing materials. And again, you know, 82% of them did not receive a triennial inspection. And, you know, I only asked about the two that I gave. I didn't, you know, I said, all right, tell me about my kid's school, which hadn't had an inspection in 15 years. And tell me about the school the mayor is going to today, which hasn't had, 15 years from 2008 at PS 107. And yeah, about the same for 2011, so 14 years for PS 88. So we just don't know. I mean, we did not find, you know, we did not go out and, you know, we're not asbestos inspectors. That's why you need a licensed asbestos inspector. So we don't know of particular buildings where there might be a leak or uncontained asbestos taking place. What we know is in 82% of the buildings that have asbestos-containing material, the inspector who was supposed to go out and make sure didn't go. Thank you guys, Faiza, Shiv, Maura. That was great. So city employees, our teachers and cops and firefighters can feel confident in their retirement security. The New York City pension funds are invested broadly and for the long term, and we are on solid ground to meet every obligation that we have. Having said that, I mean, what is happening as a result of Donald Trump's tariffs tanking the stock market and threatening recession is catastrophically bad for the global economy and for New York City as well. Our funds, I mean, obviously things are going up and down so erratically, it's hard to give, you know, any right up to the moment. When I asked yesterday, our funds were down about 5%. They had reached a peak of $285 billion, and at the moment that I asked, we're about $270 billion. That's actually a lot less than many other funds have are down in this period of time, that's still a lot of money. And as we approach the budget season, with the likelihood of a recession, tax revenues may well be down. With pension funds down, the city will have to put more money into the pension funds to keep retirement security for decades to come. And that really could pinch our budget. That could cost jobs. What Trump is doing is catastrophically bad for the economy and catastrophically bad for New York City. At the same time, New York City retirees, our firefighters and nurses and school crossing guards, can count on the New York City pension funds. We invest them broadly across asset classes with an eye to the long term. We don't go in for day trading or like chasing the market. We invest conservatively and responsibly so that we can guarantee every single pension that we promised. Thank you all very much. Oh wait, no, yeah, okay. This is something that I've been focused on obviously for a year and a half, and I often go to a vigil that takes place in Union Square, which is calling every week both for a release of all those hostages and for a ceasefire and an end to the war, because every single one of those Palestinian children in Gaza is created in God's image, and every one of those Israeli hostages is created in God's image, and we want them home and we want them safe.